"Thank you," she whispered again, louder this time, her voice trembling. The boy shook his head, his voice quiet. "You don't have to thank me. I saw your baby was hurting. I wanted to help." But she wasn't the only one who wanted to speak. A man at the corner table called out, "That was incredible, son." Another chimed in, "You have a gift, don't ever stop singing." The boy looked up, startled by the praise, his eyes darting around the room. He wasn't used to being noticed, not like this. Most days, he was invisible. People passed him by on the streets, never hearing his quiet humming. But here, now, every eye was on him, every heart touched by his simple act. The applause grew stronger, not thunderous, but steady and heartfelt. And though it embarrassed him, a shy smile crept across the boy's face. The rich woman stepped closer, her free hand trembling as she reached into her purse. She pulled out her wallet, her instinct as someone used to solving problems with money. She opened it, ready to offer him something. But when she looked at his face, the shy humility, the way he shifted nervously, she paused. Slowly, she closed it again. This wasn't about money. She understood that now. She looked at him with new eyes, not as a poor boy who needed charity, but as someone who had given her something priceless, something she could never repay: peace, love, and a lesson in humility. The baby sighed softly in her arms, still asleep, and she pressed her lips to the child's forehead once more. She whispered again, almost to herself, "Sometimes the richest gifts come from the poorest hands." The boy heard it. His smile grew a little wider. The crowd's reaction was not just applause. It was a collective shift of hearts. People who had walked in carrying stress and irritation now carried awe. Strangers shared glances of understanding, of respect. And all of them would leave that cafe with a story they would never forget. At the center of it all, the boy stood quietly, humble and small. But in that moment, he was the largest presence in the room. For a long moment after the boy's last note faded, the cafe remained suspended in silence. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, but full of awe, full of meaning, full of something no one could quite explain. The crying had stopped, the storm had passed, and in its place was a calm so deep that even the faint hum of the ceiling lights seemed louder than before. The baby slept peacefully in the rich woman's arms, tiny lips parted in soft breaths, cheeks still damp with tears but calm at last. The woman herself sat frozen, rocking gently, her eyes fixed on the poor boy standing before her. Her mind replayed the past minutes again and again, the cries, her helplessness, the judgmental stares, and then this miracle. A miracle brought not by money, not by status, but by the voice of a boy she would never have noticed in any other circumstance. Tears rolled down her cheeks, unashamed now. She pressed a kiss against her baby's forehead, whispering, "You're okay, my love, you're okay." But her words weren't just for her child, they were for herself too. She felt a weight lifting from her chest, replaced by something gentler, something humbler. The rest of the cafe sat in stunned silence, each person processing what they had just witnessed. A businessman who had been scowling earlier now leaned back in his chair, his eyes soft, his lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't. His phone lay forgotten on the table, the glowing screen dimming into darkness. He glanced at the boy, and for the first time in a long time, his hardened face showed admiration. The young couple near the window, who had once exchanged annoyed glances, now held hands tightly. The woman whispered, "Did you see that?" And the man nodded, his eyes fixed on the boy. "It's unbelievable. He just stopped the crying." The violinist, who had put her instrument down during the song, pressed her bow gently against her chest. Her eyes glistened with tears she hadn't expected. In her world of polished performances, she had never heard anything so raw and so pure. She whispered softly to herself, "That's music." Even the staff, trained to keep smiling no matter what, stood still. A waiter with a tray of desserts in his hands paused mid-step, his eyes wide. The busboy near the kitchen door leaned against the wall, his mouth open in awe. None of them had ever seen the cafe so quiet, so united, so touched. And then, like a ripple spreading across still water, the silence began to shift. It wasn't broken by impatience or irritation this time. It was broken by something softer. A woman near the bar began to clap, just once, tentative, as if testing the air. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds the cafe was filled with the sound of applause, not loud or rowdy, but gentle, reverent, like gratitude made audible. The boy's eyes widened, his face flushing with surprise. He hadn't expected this. He had only wanted to help. He hadn't sung for attention, hadn't sung for recognition. And now, as the room clapped for him, he shifted awkwardly, his hands clasped together in front of him. He lowered his head slightly, embarrassed by the attention, but also deeply moved. The rich woman looked around, her heart swelling with gratitude, not just for her child's peace, but for the boy who had given it. She stood slowly, her baby cradled gently against her shoulder, and turned to face him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The wealthy woman in her silk and diamonds, and the poor boy in his worn clothes. Two worlds that rarely touched, now bound together by a single, unforgettable moment. She covered her mouth with one hand, a sob of relief escaping her lips. The sound of her child's laughter, faint but unmistakable, followed soon after. It rang through the cafe like the sweetest music anyone had ever heard. The boy paused for a second, then let out a shy, gentle grin. His song softened further, blending with the baby's tiny giggles, creating a harmony that felt too perfect to be real. The rich woman's tears spilled freely now, sliding down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead against her baby's soft hair. She whispered, "Thank you, God. Thank you." The baby reached out, tiny fingers stretching toward the boy as though trying to grab hold of his voice. The boy stepped a little closer, his song still quiet, his eyes warm. For that moment, it felt like the two of them, the poor boy and the rich woman's child, existed in their own small universe, connected by something greater than words or wealth. The rest of the cafe sat frozen in awe. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others smiled softly, their hearts touched in ways they couldn't explain. It wasn't just about a baby calming down. It was about something deeper, the reminder that kindness, talent, and humanity could bridge worlds that money and status never could. The baby's transformation was complete now. The little body that had been stiff with anger was relaxed, nestled against the mother's chest. The cries that had shaken the cafe were replaced with soft breaths, peaceful and steady. The tiny eyes fluttered once, twice, then closed gently, drifting into sleep as the boy's voice carried the lullaby to its quiet end. The woman rocked her baby slowly, tears still wet on her cheeks, but her face now glowed with gratitude. She looked up at the boy, her lips trembling, her heart swelling with words she couldn't quite form. The boy stopped singing, his voice fading into silence, but the magic Lin jeered. The cafe was still, the baby slept, and every single person in the room knew they had just witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. The sound of the boy's voice floated like a gentle breeze through the cafe, weaving into every corner, soft and steady. Just moments before, the air had been thick with tension, filled with cries so sharp that they had pierced every ear and rattled every heart. Now, something extraordinary was happening. The baby, red-faced, restless, fists clenched tight, began to change. The screams slowed, broke into smaller sobs, then softened into hiccups. The tiny chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, struggling between the memory of distress and the pull of the calm melody. The boy's song wrapped around the child like a blanket, warm and invisible, and the effect was undeniable. The little hands that had been striking the air began to relax. The fists uncurled, fingers stretching and twitching as though they were reaching for the sound itself. The eyes, squeezed shut in frustration, opened slowly. At first they blinked through tears, wet lashes sticking together, but then they fixed on the boy, wide, curious, searching. The baby listened. For the first time in what felt like forever, the cafe wasn't filled with screams. It was filled with silence and song. The rich woman's arms, which had been trembling with effort, grew still. She held her child close, her heartbeat slowing as the cries faded. She stared in wonder, unable to believe what she was seeing. This child, who had rejected every bottle, every pacifier, every attempt at comfort, was now resting quietly in her arms, soothed not by wealth or objects, but by a stranger's voice. Tears stung her eyes, not from frustration now, but from relief so deep it almost hurt. Her shoulders, heavy with exhaustion just minutes ago, loosened. She breathed out a long, shaky sigh, one hand pressing gently against her baby's back, the other clutching the stroller handle for balance. For the first time that afternoon, she felt peace wash over her. The boy sang on, his voice steady and humble. He didn't sing like someone trying to impress. He sang like someone giving a gift. Each note was pure, honest, carrying years of quiet practice, born not from lessons but from love, for his sister, for his family, for himself, and now for this baby who needed it most. Around them, the cafe was transformed. People who had been annoyed now sat still, their irritation forgotten. A businessman leaned back in his chair, his stern face softening. A young couple reached across the table and held hands, smiling at each other as if reminded of something important. The violinist, who had stopped playing altogether, rested her bow gently on her lap, her eyes shining as she listened. Even the waiters slowed their hurried steps, pausing mid-task to absorb the moment. No one spoke. No one dared. The usual clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation were gone. The boy's voice filled the silence, and the silence made the boy's voice stronger. And the baby, oh, the baby, was changing with every second. The cries were gone now. In their place were soft coos, the kind that bubbled gently like a stream after a storm. The baby blinked again and again, eyes wide with innocence, staring at the boy as though mesmerized. The little mouth, once open in screams, curved into something else, something that made the rich woman's heart lurch in her chest. A smile. Small, uncertain at first, but real. Her baby was smiling. The boy heard it, though her voice was barely audible. He nodded slightly, still singing, his eyes focused not on her, but on the child. This wasn't about attention, or praise, or even gratitude. It was about the baby. It was about helping, because he couldn't sit there and do nothing while he had the power to make a difference. Around them, the cafe remained silent. No one dared interrupt. Some diners leaned back in their chairs, their expressions softening, as if they were witnessing something rare and precious. Others smiled faintly, whispering to each other in awe. A few even reached discreetly for their phones, not to record, but to write down the moment in their own memories. The rich woman gently rocked her baby now, her movements finally easy, her shoulders no longer stiff with frustration. The child rested against her, calm at last, the tiny hand still stretching toward the boy's voice. She couldn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but she knew she was witnessing something extraordinary. The boy's song slowed, the last notes trailing into the air like the final strokes of a brush on a canvas. He lowered his gaze, suddenly aware of the silence that followed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The room was caught between disbelief and wonder. And then, softly, the baby sighed. A tiny, content sound that seemed to release the whole room from its breathless hold. The boy stepped back slightly, unsure if he should stay or leave. His face carried no pride, only humility. He had done what he came to do. But he didn't know if he had crossed a line, if the rich woman would scold him for stepping into her world uninvited. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes shining with tears, her voice trembling. You're incredible." The boy shook his head quickly, his voice quiet. "It's nothing. I just wanted to help." But everyone in that cafe knew it was not nothing. It was everything. At that moment, the poor boy who had walked in unnoticed became the most important person in the room. Not because of wealth, not because of status, but because he had given something priceless: peace, comfort, and a reminder that kindness often comes from the most unexpected places. For a few seconds after the baby quieted, the cafe seemed suspended in time. The crying that had dominated every corner of the room was gone, replaced by something softer, almost sacred. The boy's voice hung in the air, tender and pure, as if each note carried a secret comfort only the baby could understand. The silence of disbelief around him made the melody sound even stronger, even though it was barely above a hum. The rich woman sat frozen, her arms wrapped around her child, staring at the boy in stunned silence. She had tried everything: rocking, bottles, lullabies, and nothing had worked. Yet here stood a boy in worn clothes, a stranger with nothing, and his voice had done what wealth and comfort could not. Her heart thudded in her chest, part relief, part astonishment, part shame. The boy shifted slightly, unsure if he should stop. His eyes flicked nervously to the mother, searching her face for permission to continue. He had not meant to interrupt so boldly, to place himself in the center of a room filled with people far richer, far more powerful than him. But when he saw the baby's tiny hand unclench and the eyes slowly flutter open in calm curiosity, he knew he had done the right thing. Still, he felt small under the weight of all the stares. People who had ignored him minutes ago now leaned forward, their forks paused mid-air, their conversations abandoned. The violinist lowered his instrument to his lap. A waiter, halfway through pouring water into a glass, stood frozen, drops spilling over the rim unnoticed. Every pair of eyes in the cafe was on him. The boy swallowed, nervousness creeping into his chest. His instinct was to shrink, to step back into the corner where he could be invisible again. But then the baby let out a soft coo, a sound so different from the endless screams before. It was small, but it was proof. The voice had worked. The boy inhaled deeply, summoning courage from a place he didn't know he had, and continued to sing. This time he added words, simple ones. A song he had often sung to his little sister on nights when the world felt too heavy, when their stomachs were empty, or when she cried out from bad dreams. The tune wasn't polished, but it was filled with warmth. His voice wove through the cafe like a thread stitching torn fabric, mending what had been broken just minutes ago. The baby's eyes locked on him, wide and curious. The tears stopped, the small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Tiny fingers reached upward, as if grasping at the sound itself. The transformation was undeniable. Where there had been chaos, now there was calm. The rich woman's eyes welled with tears. She pressed her lips together, trying to hold them back. But one slipped free, rolling down her cheek. She had felt helpless moments earlier, powerless despite all her resources. Now, watching her baby soothed by a boy who had nothing but his voice, she felt something shift inside her. Gratitude, yes, but also humility. She whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you." The rich woman lifted her head, startled. For a second, she thought he might be coming to ask for something, maybe money. Her brows furrowed slightly, her body tensing as she instinctively drew her baby closer. But the boy didn't speak, he didn't beg, he didn't demand. He simply stopped a few feet away, met her tired eyes with his calm ones, and then he opened his mouth. The first note was soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper carried on the air. But it was pure, so pure that it seemed to cut through the crying like sunlight breaking through clouds. People in the cafe turned their heads, their curiosity deepening. The boy sang. His voice, untrained but filled with warmth, floated gently across the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy. It was simple, natural, the kind of sound that felt like a hug. The melody carried no words at first, just gentle hums that rose and fell with soothing rhythm. And then something incredible happened. The baby's cries began to soften. The fists loosened. The little face, red from endless screaming, slowly relaxed. The baby blinked, the sound of the boy's voice wrapping around it like a lullaby. Within moments, the wailing stopped. Silence filled the space where chaos had been only seconds earlier. The boy didn't stop singing. He continued softly, his eyes never leaving the child, his voice steady and kind. The cafe, once full of whispers and irritation, now sat frozen in awe. Even the violinist lowered his bow, as if unwilling to interrupt the magic of the moment. The rich woman's lips parted in disbelief. Her eyes widened, tears threatening to fall. Not from frustration this time, but from relief. She clutched her baby gently, her heart racing as she watched the impossible unfold. In that moment, the poor boy, overlooked by all, became the center of the entire room. The cafe was alive with discomfort. The crying of the baby had swallowed every sound, turning laughter into silence and music into background noise. People shifted in their seats, exchanged glances, whispered to one another. But in one corner, at a small table near the wall, sat a boy who wasn't annoyed or impatient or judgmental. He was simply watching. His clothes were worn, a little too big for his thin frame. His shoes were scuffed, the soles beginning to peel. Beside him sat a small cloth bag that carried all he owned, a couple of books, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in paper, and an old water bottle. He had slipped into the cafe not to order food, he couldn't afford it, but to sit quietly in the warmth, away from the harsh air outside. Most people hadn't even noticed him. To them, he was invisible. But he noticed everything. He noticed the way the rich woman's hands trembled as she tried to soothe her child. He noticed the tears shining in her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, the way she forced a smile every time someone looked at her, though inside she was breaking. He noticed the baby's red cheeks, the tiny fists punching at the air, the way the cries tore through the room like a storm. Unlike the others, he didn't see the scene as an inconvenience. He saw it as pain. Pain he recognized. The boy's life had been filled with struggles, nights without dinner, days wearing the same clothes, mornings waking up to the sound of his stomach growling. He had seen his mother cry quietly over unpaid bills, had watched neighbors argue loudly about nothing because poverty had stolen their peace. He knew what it felt like to be helpless, to want to fix something and have no power to do so. That same helplessness was written all over the rich woman's face now. But the boy also carried something else, something no hardship could take away. His voice. He had been singing since he was small. It wasn't something he had learned from teachers or coaches. It was something he found on his own, sitting on porches, humming to himself when the nights felt too long or when his little sister was sick and needed comfort. His voice wasn't perfect, not polished like singers on television, but it was warm, soft, and real, and often it had the power to calm the storms around him. As he sat there, listening to the baby's cries, he felt a pull inside. Something told him he had to try. At first, he hesitated. Who was he, a poor boy in worn-out clothes, to approach a woman dripping in diamonds and silk? What if she yelled at him? What if she told him to leave? He had been pushed aside before, told he didn't belong, told his place was outside, not in places like this. But then the baby's cries cut through again, sharper than before, and he saw the mother close her eyes, her lips trembling as if she were whispering a prayer. And that was enough. The boy took a deep breath. His chest rose and fell slowly, like he was gathering not just air but courage. He pushed his chair back quietly, the scrape of its legs against the floor catching the attention of a few nearby diners. He stood, small but steady, his thin hands gripping the strap of his bag for a moment before he let it fall back to the chair. He stepped forward, cautious but sure, moving toward the table where the rich woman sat with her baby. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also necessary, as if fate itself was guiding him. The room, filled with whispers moments ago, seemed to grow quieter. People noticed him now, the boy they had ignored. They watched curiously as he walked closer, their annoyance at the crying replaced by confusion at what this child might do. She glanced around the cafe again, and the sight made her stomach twist. Everyone was watching now. Even the violinist had slowed his bow, the notes softer, almost uncertain. A waiter passing by gave her a sympathetic smile, but she could see the nervous flicker in his eyes too. She imagined the whispers spreading. She can't handle her baby. Why doesn't she leave? The woman buried her face briefly against her baby's soft hair, taking a shaky breath. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. She couldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She was supposed to be strong, supposed to be untouchable. Yet here she was, broken by the cries of her own child. She whispered again, her voice trembling. "Please, sweetheart. Please, just give me one moment of quiet." Her words cracked, almost a prayer. The crying didn't stop. And then the frustration twisted into something deeper, something raw. She realized that for the first time, her wealth was useless. Her silk dress, her diamonds, her expensive stroller, her designer bag, none of it could fix this moment. She felt stripped of everything that made her feel powerful. She was just a mother, exhausted, desperate, vulnerable. At that moment, she wanted nothing more than peace. Just a second of silence. Just one deep breath without the sound of screaming. She wanted to disappear from the stairs, to melt into the golden walls of the cafe, to escape the spotlight of judgment. But just as she closed her eyes, holding her baby tight, she felt it, a shift in the air. From across the cafe, a sound rose, soft at first, but clear. It wasn't the violin, and it wasn't the clinking of glasses. It was a voice, a young, unpolished, but deeply warm voice. The poor black boy, sitting quietly until now, had opened his mouth and begun to sing. The notes floated gently through the cafe, soft and pure, weaving through the crowd, east like sunlight through clouds. It wasn't loud, but it carried a power that made people pause. Conversations halted, forks froze midair, heads turned toward the boy whose presence most had ignored until now. And slowly, miraculously, the baby's cries began to soften. The cries did not stop. They grew sharper, filling the cafe like waves crashing against walls that couldn't hold them back. Every second felt longer, every sound heavier. The rich woman clutched her baby tighter, her body swaying as though movement alone might magically soothe the child. But nothing changed. The tiny face remained red, the fists clenched, the mouth wide with endless screams. Her silk dress, once neat and graceful, now felt suffocating. The gold watch on her wrist weighed heavier than usual, and the diamond earrings that sparkled earlier now felt useless, meaningless. For the first time in a long time, all the signs of wealth she wore so proudly seemed like decorations in the wrong play. What good were they if she couldn't even calm her own child? She rocked the stroller again, harder this time, as if urgency might make a difference. Her manicured hands shook slightly, betraying the calm image she tried to maintain. She bent down close to her baby's ear, whispering desperately, "Please, please stop. Mommy's here. You're fine. Please, just stop crying." Her voice cracked, the words heavy with exhaustion. But the baby's cries only rose higher, bouncing off the cafe walls, making heads turn everywhere she looked. The other customers were no longer pretending not to notice. She caught their glances, the frowns, the raised eyebrows, the subtle sighs. A businessman at a nearby table shifted in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. A young couple tried to keep talking, but their eyes flickered toward her every few seconds. An older woman shook her head slightly, muttering something under her breath to her companion. The rich woman's chest tightened. She felt cornered, exposed, judged. In her world, she was used to admiration, to respect. When she entered a room, people noticed her for her beauty, her elegance, her wealth. But here, in this cafe, he was noticed for something else, something she couldn't control. And that, more than anything, hurt her pride. Her baby's crying wasn't just noise anymore. It was a spotlight, pulling every eye toward her, stripping away the image she tried so hard to present. She pressed her lips together, holding back the sting of tears. "Why won't you stop?" she whispered again. But this time the words weren't just for her child, they were for herself. Why couldn't she fix this? Why, with all her resources, all her knowledge, did she feel so powerless? Her frustration grew, not at the baby, but at the situation. She had read all the parenting books, hired the best nannies, bought the finest toys and clothes. She had prepared for moments like this, but nothing in her world of comfort had prepared her for this kind of helplessness. No amount of money could buy silence, and no diamond could calm a crying baby. She tried sitting back down, bouncing the baby on her lap. She hummed a lullaby, her voice trembling, but the melody broke under the force of the screams. She tried offering the bottle again, but the baby turned away, crying harder, tiny tears streaming down soft cheeks. She tried pressing the pacifier gently, but it was spit out instantly, landing on the floor with a soft bounce. The woman leaned back in her chair, defeated. Her arms ached, her head throbbed, and her heart pounded with a mix of love and exhaustion. She loved her baby deeply, fiercely, but in this moment, that love carried the weight of helplessness. The waiter approached carefully, setting a fresh glass of water on her table. "Ma'am, is there anything I can bring for you? Maybe something warm for the baby?" His voice was polite, but she could hear the edge of discomfort beneath it. She shook her head quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No, thank you. I'll manage." But inside, she didn't believe it. Her heart ached. She loved her baby with all her soul. But in that moment, she felt like she was failing. She thought of all the comforts she could afford. Private doctors, the best toys, the finest foods, and yet none of it mattered here. In the face of her child's cries, she was just another mother, helpless and desperate. Around the cafe, people began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. A man coughed loudly, as if to mask his irritation. A woman near the door glanced at her watch, sighing heavily. The violinist played a little louder, trying to cover the sound, but even the music couldn't drown out the baby's wails. The rich woman sank back into her chair, exhausted. Her arms felt heavy, her body tense. She held her baby close, tears threatening to rise in her eyes. "Why won't you stop?" she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. And then, in that moment of helplessness, she noticed movement from the other side of the cafe. A boy, no older than 13, sat quietly at a small table near the back. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed, his bag resting beside him. He had been there all along, unnoticed by most. While others looked on with impatience or pity, his eyes were different. They were soft, understanding, almost curious. He didn't frown or whisper. He simply watched. The woman didn't pay much attention to him yet. Her focus was still on her child, whose cries showed no sign of stopping. But soon, this boy, the one no one expected, would rise from his seat. And when he did, everything in the cafe would change. For now, though, the cries continued. The endless crying filled every corner of the room, pressing against the patience of everyone inside. And the rich woman, despite all her wealth, felt poorer than ever, in energy, in strength, in peace. The cafe, usually filled with soft conversations and gentle background music, was now ruled by the sharp, piercing cries of the baby. What had started as small whimpers had grown into full-throated wails, echoing against the marble floors and tall glass walls. It was the kind of crying that refused to be ignored. the kind that wrapped itself around every ear in the room, making even the violinist hesitate for a moment before continuing to play. The rich woman held her child close, rocking back and forth, her silk dress rustling with each movement. Beads of sweat began to form on her forehead, her perfect makeup struggling to hide her exhaustion. She tried everything she knew, humming softly into the baby's ear, patting the tiny back in a steady rhythm, whispering words of comfort. But the cries only grew louder, rising like waves that refused to break. She reached for the bottle again, pressing it gently against the baby's lips. "Come on, sweetheart, just drink a little," she begged softly. But the baby turned its head away, kicking its legs in frustration. The bottle slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table, rolling against the untouched slice of cake. The noise drew stares. At one table, a man in a suit set down his newspaper, his brow furrowing as he glanced toward her. At another, two women paused mid-laughter, their smiles fading as the cries cut through their conversation. Even the waiters exchanged nervous glances, their polite smiles stiffening as they continued their work. The woman felt the weight of every stare. She could almost hear the silent thoughts. Why can't she control her child? Why bring a baby here? The judgment pressed down on her harder than the noise itself. She bounced the baby gently, her arms growing tired, whispering, "Please, please stop." But the baby's face remained red, tiny fists clenched, eyes shut tight as the wail's continued. Minutes passed like hours. The woman tried walking back and forth, pacing slowly across the corner of the cafe, her heels clicking against the floor. She swayed left and right, rocking with a rhythm that should have soothed the child. But nothing worked. Her elegant presence, her expensive dress, her diamond earrings, all of it seemed useless now. She was just a mother, desperate and exhausted, powerless against the relentless cries of her baby. The sound filled the cafe so completely that conversations began to falter. Diners who had once been laughing now spoke in hushed tones, their eyes flicking toward the woman with a mix of sympathy and irritation. A few parents in the room offered small, knowing smiles, as if to say, "We've been there too," but others were less forgiving. A young man at the bar muttered under his breath, "Why doesn't she just leave?" His friend shrugged, whispering, "Maybe she can't." The rich woman heard none of it directly, but she felt it. The stares, the whispers, the weight of being the center of unwanted attention. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She was used to being admired, to walking into rooms where people looked at her with envy or respect. But here, now, all she saw in their eyes was impatience. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the baby against her shoulder. She kissed the soft hair, whispering desperately, it's okay, please calm down." But the cries didn't soften. They pierced through her words, louder than the soothing whispers, louder than the music, louder than anything else. Her coffee, once steaming, now sat untouched. She didn't even notice the waiter placing a slice of cake beside her. She was too focused on the red face of her baby, the tears streaming, the cries echoing. She tried rocking, humming, even walking a few steps back and forth. Nothing worked. The noise continued, drawing more and more attention from the room. Every second felt longer than the last. She glanced at her watch, wishing time would move faster, wishing she could disappear from the stares around her. She loved her baby more than anything, but in that moment, she felt the crushing weight of exhaustion and embarrassment. Around her, life went on. A man at the window sipped his espresso, pretending not to notice. Two women laughed quietly over their pastries, but their eyes kept flicking toward the crying baby. The staff tried to hide their discomfort, but she could see the slight tension in their smiles. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. Inside, she was repeating the same thought. Why won't you stop crying? What else can I do? For all her wealth, all her elegance, all her strength, she felt small in that moment. trapped in a public place, unable to give her baby the comfort it needed, unable to quiet the noise echoing off the cafe's golden walls. And yet, what she didn't know was that help would come from the most unexpected place. Not from a nanny, not from a doctor, not from any of the expensive comforts money could buy, but from someone simple, someone overlooked, someone whose voice carried a gift. At another table, not far away, a poor black boy sat quietly, his clothes worn, his shoes scuffed, a small bag by his side. He watched the scene with wide eyes, his heart aching at the sound of the crying baby. Unlike the others, he didn't look annoyed, he didn't whisper or frown. He simply sat there, listening, thinking. The woman didn't know him yet. To her, he was just another face in the room. But soon, his voice would cut through the noise of her baby's cries in a way she never expected. For now, though, the afternoon remained heavy. The luxury of the cafe, the polished tables, the sparkling chandeliers, all of it felt useless against the sound of one baby's desperate cries. And the woman, rich as she was, felt helpless in a way she never had before. The afternoon sun shone brightly through the tall glass windows of the cafe, spilling golden light across the polished tables. The cafe was one of the most expensive in the city, a place where the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the soft music playing in the background. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved quickly but gracefully, carrying trays of cakes, croissants, and glasses of sparkling water. The air buzzed with quiet conversations. Businessmen in suits, women with designer handbags, and tourists snapping photos of the elegant decor. At a corner table, a woman sat with her baby in a stroller beside her. She wore a silk dress and diamond earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head. A gold watch glimmered on her wrist, and her nails were painted a perfect shade of red. She looked like someone who had everything: wealth, beauty, and comfort. The kind of person who never had to worry about bills, long commutes, or sleepless nights working double shifts. To the world around her, she looked like the picture of success. But at that moment, she was not thinking about her wealth. She was thinking about her baby, who had started to cry. At first, it was just a soft whimper, the kind every baby makes. She leaned down, stroked the baby's cheek gently, and whispered, "Shh, it's okay." But the whimper turned into a louder cry. She tried rocking the stroller back and forth, her movements quickening as the baby's cries grew sharper. People at nearby tables turned their heads, some curious, some already frowning at the noise. The woman reached into a designer bag that probably cost more than most people's rent, pulling out a bottle of warm milk. She held it close to the baby's lips, hoping it would work. Sometimes it did, but today the baby turned away, screaming louder, tiny fists waving in the air. Her heart sank. She felt the heat of embarrassment rise to her cheeks as the sound grew louder and louder. She looked around quickly, seeing the stares. Some people smiled politely, trying to show understanding, but others clearly looked annoyed. A couple at the next table whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The woman sighed and tried again. She lifted the baby from the stroller, cradling the little body against her shoulder. She bounced gently, patting the baby's back, whispering in a soothing tone. But the cries only grew stronger, piercing the elegant calm of the cafe. The violin music in the background seemed to fade under the sound of the wails. "Please," she whispered under her breath, rocking faster. "Please, just stop." It wasn't just about the noise. It was the helplessness. Here she was, a woman who could buy anything, diamonds, mansions, cars, but she couldn't buy peace at that moment. She couldn't buy a way to calm her baby. She felt her chest tighten with frustration, not at the child, but at herself. Why couldn't she manage something so simple? Why, with all her resources, did she feel so powerless in this moment?